Hi, everyone. We're going to join shortly. We're just waiting for a few more people to join our Zoom room, so just about another minute. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. I'm Adrian Scott Fine. I am the Director of Advocacy for the Los Angeles Conservancy. So again, thank you for being with us today. We are also on Facebook Live, so hello to our Facebook friends. And we're also recording this, so it will be available on YouTube. If you're not already following one of those channels, please do so and also become a member of the Los Angeles Conservancy. We really greatly appreciate your support, especially during this time more than ever. So we're here to talk about the Downtown LA Community Plan, or DTLA 2040. It's a community plan that merges and updates the Central City and Central City North community plans. And it really lays out the future for how, the what, the where new development will happen in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, for really the next 20 years. And it will be the first community plan to be rolled out by the city of Los Angeles that will include new form-based code tools such as Recode LA, and introduce a range of new land use functions and tools that will be part of that. And for nearly 6 years of outreach, the draft DTLA 2040 plan was released in early August, and now it's awaiting comments, feedback, and we'll start the process. And those comments are due on December 4th. So we wanted to have an opportunity to bring various folks together and the Department of City Planning to hear more about the plan, but also specific preservation aspects. So our plan for today is we'll have a short presentation by members of the Department of City Planning staff, and then we'll follow that with a Q&A. And so we would encourage you now and throughout the presentation, as things come up or you have questions, start putting those into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen there. We will queue those up, and then once we're finishing the presentation, we'll be ready to go with questions. We'll go until 1 or earlier, however that flows. And so we're very happy and thankful to have various members of the Department of City Planning with us today. Brittany Arsenault and Vina Sinesh will be presenting, and then we'll have Craig Weber, who will also be joining us at the end to answer any questions after the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Brittany and Vina to start us off.
Thank you, Adrian. Appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the presentation. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have this opportunity to update you on the Downtown Community Plan. Just a little bit of background, we launched this project in 2014. So we've been doing years and years of engagement and refining of the draft plan. For those of you who are just joining us today for the first time, this presentation, as Adrian mentioned, is really going to focus on the preservation aspects of the plan, and I highly encourage you to join us for more general presentations of the plan. I'll talk a little bit about those opportunities at the end of this meeting, and also provide you the link to our website. But really, this is a comprehensive vision looking at the growth of downtown over the next 20-30 years, and how do we ensure that downtown really remains a place for all, and that we can sustain and celebrate the historic legacy of so many of downtown's neighborhoods. So Vina is going to walk through the preservation aspects of the plan, and then I'm going to touch a little bit on what's changed recently and what types of changes we're anticipating for the next draft that'll be released later this year. So with that, Vina, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you all for inviting us. Thank you all for inviting us today. Appreciate the opportunity to present the plan for you all. So today, I'll give a high-level overview of how we envision downtown of the future, looking at it more with the lens of the physical characteristics and the design aspects, and also talk a little bit about some of the tools and strategies we are utilizing to achieve that vision. Next slide, please. Thank you. As we all know, downtown is the cultural and the civic heart of the city, home to diverse groups of people with a variety of neighborhoods, such as Chinatown in the north, Arts District to the east, the industrial uses and the fashion district to the south, South Park, Bunker Hill, and the financial districts in the western part of downtown, with the Civic Center, Little Tokyo, and the Toy District generally in the center of the planned area. So downtown is essentially a mix of a variety of neighborhoods today. However, the downtown planned area is also a transportation hub with many regional connections, as well as local bus and rail connections that interlink the different neighborhoods within downtown. And there's also many new investments that's coming its way, such as the Santa Ana branch and the regional connector. And so how best can we capitalize on this baseline of existing infrastructure without losing the identity of downtown as a collection of this really distinctive neighborhoods has really guided our approach on what the capacity of the plant should be and how and where we accommodate this growth. The Southern California Association of Governments has projected significant growth for the plant area, about 125,000 new residents, 70,000 new housing units, and 55,000 new jobs by 2040. However, the plan is accommodating for even more, 175,000 new residents, 100,000 new housing units, and 100,000 new jobs. Absorbing a substantial share of the cities or the regional growth would increase transit access to more people, and providing more capacity for housing within downtown would benefit those people who depend on transit and rely on transit the most and take advantage of the jobs, employment, services, and other amenities that already exist here. And next slide, please. As I touched on earlier, the intent of the plan is to balance this anticipated growth while maintaining the qualities and the flavor of these local neighborhoods that make up downtown. So these strategies generally fall into two broad categories under preserving existing buildings through programs such as adaptive reuse and the transfer of development rights from historic buildings to other infill projects, and reinforcing the community character by being very thoughtful about where growth occurs and using the zoning tools, including form, frontage, and use regulations to shape the design of buildings that are responsive to the existing context. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the strategies that we are included for preserving existing buildings. One of them is the adaptive reuse program, which exists today and has really worked for downtown. We know it's been one of the critical programs for revitalizing downtown. So under the plan, we will be expanding the area where adaptive reuse program would be available. It would be available for the entire plan area. Currently, it's only allowed in the central city portion of the plan. Going forward, it could be used in places like Chinatown and Arts District as well. And The plan also creates more opportunities for reusing existing historic buildings. So under the plan, a project, an existing historic structure could be adapted to any use as long as that particular use is allowed by zoning. So it doesn't have to be converted to residential units as it currently is in the program, but it could be used to serve any uses. And considering the fact that under the downtown plan, a majority, more than 60% of the plan area allows for mixed use, an existing historic structure has the potential to support many uses within its lifetime, depending on market needs and demands, and thereby extend the longevity and the usefulness of these buildings. The plan also creates a smoother pathway. It includes a number of additional incentives to promote the reuse of historic structures. For example, any existing floor area within the envelope could change its use. For example, a basement could be used for parking, could be put to any use without that having to count towards as new floor area. And projects can also include up to 1 story in height without counting towards FAR. And another exciting update under this program is the rolling date for buildings. Currently, only buildings that are built prior to 1974 qualify for adaptive reuse, but under the new plan, any building that's been 25 years since it received certificate of occupancy would be allowed to utilize the adaptive reuse. And so accounting for today's new buildings could become historic in time. And the other program we are incorporating under the plan is the transfer of development rights for historic structures to allow for transfers of FAR from a donor site to a receiver site. There were a few considerations that went into why this transfer of development rights is available in this particular area, which is the L.A Historic Industrial District. Our consultants did a few studies on the incentive programs in other cities. And one of the things they looked at was the TDR program. And what they found was that when TDR is available to a bigger area and there's a wider pool of donors and receiver sites, there's potential for floor area to be transferred from less expensive locations to more expensive locations, which could result in underdevelopment in some areas and overdevelopment in others, which was something we wanted to avoid. And the other consideration was in this particular area, there's substantial delta between the base FAR, which is available by right, and the bonus FAR maximum, which is available by providing community benefits. So because there's a bigger delta, projects could be, although are required to comply with providing affordable housing as the first level of community benefits, there would still be sufficient FAR left to utilize the TDR program. Whereas in some of the other areas, the delta would be very small and would not really allow for additional programs beyond providing for affordable housing. Next slide, please. So under this program, a donor site is allowed to transfer all of its unused floor area up to its maximum FAR, bonus FAR allocated for that site. And any site that's designated at the local, state, or federal level, or it's deemed eligible, or if it's a contributor survey LA historic district or an individual resource, are eligible for donating the unused floor area. And the reservoir sites could be located within the hybrid designation area, generally to the east of Alameda. And we have some requirements. And under this, once a donor site transfers the floor area, it has to assign a covenant acknowledging the reduced floor area, and the receiver site would have to sign a covenant acknowledging the increased floor area. And a donor site is also required to comply with the certain preservation requirements, such as building maintenance, rehabilitation, and agree to certain inspections for a set time. And the second piece of the strategy that I touched on was reinforcing the community character for new infill buildings. The current zoning today influences building design. For example, if you think about the C2 zoning, it primarily focuses on the size and scale of a building and the uses within. So as you can see on the slide, there's really a variety of buildings that can fit with those regulations. And they don't necessarily are contextual to what the neighborhood character is and are very distinct from each other. However, under the new zoning tools, we have a lot of levers to tailor the shape and the design of buildings. For example, we have regulations such as a building width, where we can regulate the maximum width of a building. So in places such as, let's say, a little Tokyo, Chinatown, that width would be way smaller compared to, let's say, the arts district, which would be much wider in keeping with the industrial character of that area. Similarly, we require pedestrian breaks to ensure there's a porous environment where that's desirable. And we also have requirements related to building height, entrances, and transparency requirements as well. So there are, under the new zoning system, we have primarily 5 different components. The first 3 regulations, form, frontage, and development standards, relate to the physical and design characteristics of a building. The use refers to the uses and activities that are allowed, and the community, the last piece, which is the community plan implementation overlay for the downtown plan, really includes the community benefits program guidelines, and as well as a design best practices document. As I mentioned earlier, because we are anticipating substantial growth in downtown, we are being intentional and thoughtful about where we allocate this growth. And the way we are trying to balance it is by allocating higher intensities closer to where transit is, or where there's higher development potential that's currently available, for example, like the South Park. So in this map, the white boundaries that you see here, the areas around the white boundaries are considered peripheral and closer to transit and would allow for higher intensities. And the plan would include story limitations and other zoning regulations related to frontage to ensure that the infill within these core historic cultural neighborhoods are compatible. And the second piece of the zoning tool are the frontage regulations. As as you can see in the slide here, could you please move to the next slide? Thank you. Sorry, the previous one.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you, Brittany. So as you can see here, we have we've developed a number of frontages that are appropriate for different neighborhoods. One of the frontages that's widely used is the shopfront frontage, where we desire active street fronts. And these frontages require a high level of transparency, and buildings are required to be built closer to the sidewalk and have building breaks to encourage a more fine-grained environment. And the multi-unit frontage, which is generally applied to residential districts, in comparison would require much lower transparencies and a higher build-to width to balance privacy and the public realm. And similarly, we also have a market frontage, which also specifies that projects have frequent entrances to promote a more permeable and relationship with the street, such as outdoor display, etc. And under the plan, we are proposing 2 new character frontages, one for the historic core and the other for the arts district. And these frontage regulations go beyond what's generally regulated under the other frontages, such as shopfront or general. So I'll talk a little bit more about the historic core frontage. So under the historic core character frontage, which is applied to the traditional core of the planned area, it includes additional standards. And it, in a way, you could say that it takes on the role of a community design overlay, but it's now part of the zoning. And it's being applied to in areas of historic significance to guide new infill, but at the same time allowing for architectural innovations so that there's no imitations of historic features, but rather respects the existing historic buildings, and the new infill buildings are compatible with the scale. And the historic core frontage includes a number of additional regulations. It requires articulation, both horizontal and vertical articulation requirements. It also sets a minimum transparencies, and there's requirements related to material. Some materials are prohibited, and there's also requirements related to windows and door details, such as recessions for windows, etc. And the other character frontage, which is the daylight character frontage, is being proposed in the Arts District. It includes high transparencies, no specific articulation requirements, but it requires a taller base floor and larger openings in keeping with the industrial character of taller floor to ceiling ratios, and sets minimum transparency requirements. And similar to the historic core, it also includes material specifications and regulations for doors and windows. The other requirement that applies to this area, but it's captured under.
Oh, Vina, I think we may have missed what you said about the construction type, but I can quickly cover that. In addition to the character frontage, there's another feature of the zone called the use that does include requirements for type 1, 2, or 4 construction within the Arts District. And just to kind of echo what Vina was saying, this is to ensure longevity of the buildings and to really outline designs that can handle a range of activities and occupancy loads. Okay, Vina, are you, do you
Yeah,
want to jump in on this slide?
sure. Okay. So this is an example of a character frontage. As you can see, we have a number of regulations under articulation. One of them is the base, middle, top differentiation, which is required in the historic core. We also require historic horizontal and vertical bands, and some of the materials that are allowed here include brick, solid stone, concrete, and metal. The projects are required to have a window recession of 6 inches of minimum depth, and also requires a focal entry feature, which is typical of historic structures here. Yeah, and with that, I will turn it over to Brittany, who'll talk about some of the updates that we released this summer, and also some of the updates that are forthcoming for the public hearing.
Okay, thanks so much, Vina. So just a quick overview. So as many of you know, we released a refined plan in August of 2020. One of the changes that was applied was in the historic core. So I know we've had several really engaging conversations with this group about the height limits and character tool application within the historic core and matching those with the National Register districts. So this map on the left, the red box shows where story limitations were expanded. And that's a story limitation of 15 stories maximum. And the green box shows where the character frontage was extended and also the traditional core plan designation. Another thing that we were really excited to release in August is best practice documents. So originally, when we launched the plan, we had intended to do an overhaul of the downtown design guide. Most of that work was done by incorporating the standards into the frontages, but some of those ambient design guidelines that were not metric oriented were difficult to standardize in that manner. So we were hoping to adopt guidelines for all of downtown, but after the adoption of SB 330, cities are no longer allowed to adopt non-objective design guidelines. So what we're doing is we're taking all of that wonderful feedback and thinking that was developed through the plan process, and we're memorializing it through best practice documents that are here to really express the spirit of design that's desired in these neighborhoods. So those are appended to the CPIO if you're looking for them on our website, and we're absolutely taking feedback on those and would love to get your comments. So looking forward to fall 2020, some changes that are anticipated. One is around the entirety of the traditional core plan designation. Right now, the plan is proposing an upper story step back of 10 feet at 12 stories. And this is really to respect the datum line throughout the historic core, and also to take cues from existing documents such as the Broadway CDO. This is a requirement that currently is applied to Broadway, and we are expanding that requirement throughout all of the historic core to ensure that when new design is introduced into the district, it is stepped back. Also, we are prohibiting balconies on the first 12 stories, seeing as that is not in keeping with the existing style, but being more flexible on a tower portion if infill project reached that scale and was allowed based upon the height and FAR limitations. Also, we're looking at revisiting some of the window details and the horizontal and vertical banding, and also taking a step back and thinking critically about the roof requirements and how those relate to infill towers. So just these are shots from the actual zoning page. So I just wanted to point you in the direction of where you could look and anticipate these changes. One other change we're planning on is revisiting the front yard fence and wall standards. The current draft does not allow any fences in this district. We're expanding that to allow a screening type of A2, which would allow fences for things like open space or outdoor dining. There are transparency requirements on the fences and also a height limit. We do want to ensure a very porous street front, especially when it comes to amenity spaces and entrances throughout the district. But we don't want to force a project into discretionary review for including a fairly small screening feature. Another thing that is being considered is revision of the upper story height requirement. Originally, we had proposed a 10-foot minimum, but in discussions thinking about different types of development, we're going to scale back on that and go back to an 8-foot minimum and allow projects to decide the appropriate heights for those uses. Another thing we're taking a look at is the articulation requirements. These were defined really based upon the guidance in the Broadway CDO, ensuring that fenestration pattern of rhythm between the window spacing, making sure that there's a demarcation between the base, middle, and top. So we will still be incorporating those requirements into this character frontage, but we're just taking a closer look at some of the minimum and maximums to make sure that they scale with the various lot sizes within downtown. Also, right now, the draft requires a flat roof, but some of the conversations that we're having around tower design and just really taking a modern interpretation of this district and wanting to be more flexible on that front, especially now that we're introducing that 30-foot step back at 12 stories, that is really going to ensure a flat surface and continuation of the datum line, but we want to be more flexible on the tower portion, and also looking at some of the light pattern requirements on the windows. In terms of the Arts District character frontage, we're looking at some of the similar updates. In the Arts District, balconies will be allowed on all levels. We're looking at similar detail relief around the light pattern, also simplifying the horizontal and vertical banding and being more flexible on the roof variation. So again, these are just the screenshots of the code pages highlighting where you can anticipate to see those changes in the next draft. So with that, I just want to wrap up and kind of talk about what's ahead. So we've extended the DEIR comment period to December 4th. So that's a total 120-day comment period, really trying to be considerate of just, you know, all the challenges that people are facing right now around COVID-19 and also uprisings that are happening, and just being considerate of where people, how their time and effort is being split, and want to make sure that there's a real opportunity for engagement on the EIR. We will be holding a number of webinars leading up to the public hearing. So we'll be holding a series of Planning 101 webinars. There will be 3 events. Those are all posted on our website. This is really an opportunity to break down the fundamentals of planning for those that are just joining us on this plan update. And then we're going to have plan recap webinars that are specifically focused on the policy of the downtown plan. We'll also be holding another round of office hours in November, and we're also continually available for virtual small group engagement upon request. One other thing we're really excited about is we've added a new section to our website that is hosting many of our materials translated in multiple languages. That can be found on our About page. Also, all of our materials are available in hard copy at Automated Records. We typically place those at the library, but because of COVID-19, not all of the downtown libraries are open right now. So all these materials can be viewed by calling Automated Records. And then lastly, just wanted to point out that we will be holding a formal public hearing in December. We'll be sending out an e-blast and putting out some flyers once we have that date solidified. So keep an eye on your inbox. If you're not on our mailing list, feel free to reach out to me directly, or you can sign up on our website at planningforla.org/DTLA 2040. So with that, I think I can wrap up, and we are happy to start taking questions.
Great, thank you so much. Again, appreciate Brittany and Vina for doing this, and welcome, Craig. Nice to see you too. And we are going to take some questions. We've got some great questions lined up. I have one I'm just going to throw out because I know it comes up a lot and we've heard it a lot. Is that this is a 20-year plan, and how can it address adaptability or flexibility in that time frame and some of the tools that you're creating? And I know one that we've looked at and worked with you all on was the TFAR program for the Arts District, which we're hoping it will be wildly successful in terms of helping historic preservation, providing an incentive there. And if it does well there, how could we apply it to other similar types of areas, even within the downtown plan area? But so I guess it's an example like that. Do we have flexibility to move things around, within that 20-year period? How does that work? But also I think just flexibility in general, that a lot of things can change in 5-10 years, or we never would have anticipated we'd be in a pandemic, a year ago. So how do we look at things like that?
That's a great question. And I think the topic of flexibility has come up a lot in our engagement, and that's a real challenge in trying to craft a plan where you really need to present and then analyze from an environmental perspective discrete regulations. Like there has to be a thing to regulate and to eventually bring forward in ordinances. But amidst all that, there does need to be some flexibility. Marketplaces are dynamic. There's a lot of interest in really promoting investment and growth downtown, but a lot of external variables that could mean different things 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And certainly this year has been an excellent case study of you just never know what is coming next. With respect to the kind of detailed part of your question, let's talk a little bit about transfer of development rights, which is the program that's been envisioned for the Arts District. This program is enabled really in 2 ways in the mix of all the community plan documents. There's a section of the new municipal code, Article 9, that creates this transfer of development rights program. Actually, no, I think I just misspoke. This is contained wholly within the community plan implementation overlay. Previous drafts, it was espoused that way. So the program exists within the community plans implementing ordinance. Right now, a particular geography has been defined, but over time, that ordinance can be amended without amending the entirety of the community plan. Another neighborhood could be selected and could be applied there. So there's some modularity. The parts are all there, and it could be reapplied to different neighborhoods. The reason that it really makes sense to focus on the Arts District in terms of really rolling this program out Nina touched on earlier in the presentation, and that really is just that the overall magnitude of development that could be allowed within this neighborhood is significant for projects that work within this benefit system, but the starting place is fairly low, and that starting place is consistent with the built environment. So there's this delta here that really points to an incentive to preserve an existing building and move all of this square footage to a different site. That's not always the case in other neighborhoods. When you look at a place like the historic core, those lots tend to be built out to their entirety, and there's not a lot of superfluous floor area to move around. So we're hopeful that, and this is really a new thing for the city to try this kind of development transfer. We're hopeful that it is successful in the Arts District, and that in implementing that, we're really able to potentially refine and if appropriate, expand this type of program to other parts of the city. I would comment, just for those that are interested in the kind of broader citywide perspective, there's also a proposal to include a similar transfer of development rights program in the core of the Hollywood community plan area as well. So I guess we're experimenting with two different areas with this particular type of program.
Great, thank you. There's a number of questions that all kind of touch on a similar theme, and that's about a post-pandemic world or post-COVID world. And as this plan is, going through where it is right now, and we are where we are right now, how is it adjusting to things like, density, changing uses? We may not, and also the balcony issue has been brought up as well, access to fresh air and things like that.
Yeah.
Are there things that, like, in real time, because of thinking about post-pandemic, that will be factored into this plan?
There are some things that we've been able to immediately identify and integrate into our thinking, and then certainly our understanding of this new reality is continuing to evolve. So, Adrian, I think you touched on an important facet, which is open space. So I think that underscores why we've sought to be a little bit more flexible about balconies within the historic core, and really focusing on limiting balconies in that front-facing old bank building part of the building, but being more flexible about sides and overhead. In addition, and this is really wonkish, throughout the city and in places like downtown, there are development incentives to provide affordable housing, where essentially a project can reduce the amount of open space provided if they're providing open space, or if they're providing affordable housing. And we've deliberately removed that as an incentive within the downtown plan area. So there are other incentives. We really do want to facilitate affordable housing. That's so critical. But we've wanted to make sure that all projects, including those with lower income households, still have access to open space. It was frankly something that was important pre-pandemic, but that it is just really underscored in our current state of affairs. Others on the downtown team, is there anything you would want to touch on this topic? Okay.
Another question that's come in is about when you were talking about frontages and how that will be applied to certain areas. There was a question of like how that could be extended to places like Little Tokyo, Chinatown, or how it will happen there.
Yes, so every parcel within the downtown area would be applied a frontage. There are just a number of different varieties or flavors. So we spent a lot of time looking at the very detailed frontage tools that would be applied to the historic core and to the Arts District. But there are other frontage tools that would be applied in every other neighborhood. And there are a number of variations across those, but the repeating themes are looking at things like doors and windows facing the street. How much transparency is there? Is there direct pedestrian access, or can you build a blank wall? In some cases, like if you look at a place like the Fashion District, where there's this really unique environment of active alleys, So the frontage tool there would actually ensure that infill development is also engaging the alley as well as the street on the other end. So this is really, the city has really fatigued itself over the last decade in adopting all these design tools throughout the city that are really just trying to express some basic things like, can we have doors and windows that face the street, and some modicum of articulation. So finally, with these new zoning tools, we're able to just embed that into the zone, so that in a neighborhood like Little Tokyo, you would still expect to see doors and windows facing the street and a finer grain of development. And then that is complemented by other use tools. So for example, if you look at the zoning for the Chinatown and the Little Tokyo neighborhoods, both that have this really kind of fine grained pedestrian scale, even uses at the ground floor would be limited in terms of their size, so that we're not ending up with large scale kind of big box style development that has a really hard time engaging the pedestrian realm, that we're really prioritizing small local businesses and that same kind of urban fabric.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think what's really beneficial for Little Tokyo is the community design overlay will remain in place for that area. In terms of Chinatown, it's been such a fascinating area to create zones for there, because you have such a unique typology in the multifamily residential area. You have Broadway, you have Cesar Chavez, all with very different design legacies. So there's been a number of really specific zoning tools that have been developed for Chinatown. But instead of, kind of as Craig mentioned, I think it's really more about the combination of the form, use, and frontage for Chinatown than it is just the frontage. It's about the activities. It's about ensuring that market typology along Broadway. It's about preserving the scale as you transition into the residential neighborhood. It's about protecting the small businesses. It's about making sure that the dentist and the pharmacy and the corner store is in walking distance to the residential neighborhood. So I think that's why it's so hard for us to just focus on one aspect of the plan, like talking just about frontage tools or just about design, because it really is a comprehensive view that we're taking to really celebrate the character of these areas.
Thank you. Yeah, and we've, just so in the audience here, I know we've had a series of conversations around the frontage tool, which is, I think, a leaps and bounds above where we are now in terms of how you look at infill development, contextual, sensitive development that's reflecting the character of and the special qualities of kind of the neighborhood. I think we still have, would like to see more in terms of how do we preserve some of the elements that are there now, because the frontage tool, unless I have it wrong, is primarily geared towards the new development that's coming versus what's there now. And outside of designation or like a TFAR program, we still don't really have anything there. We've talked about conservation districts, and I don't know if that's probably not included within this plan. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that's correct. I think we've been focusing on adaptive reuse. I mean, really, we could have had a whole meeting on adaptive reuse and just all the changes that we're proposing for that. I know Vina touched on it very lightly, but we're making some pretty aggressive changes to adaptive reuse because we want to see that whole building be reused. The conservation overlays are a really useful tool, I think, when you're trying to preserve the facade, but we want to make sure that the entire building is being reactivated. So we're exempting large portions of floor area for adaptive reuse. We are allowing the rolling date. That's going to be a big change. How right now we're changing 1974 to just 25 years. I think there's a number of updates about exempting basements and things like that. So we're definitely also removing the discretionary process from adaptive reuse and making it by right and allowing any change of use. I think that's going to be really key. Also, these changes are really important thinking about how COVID-19 is affecting the way that we use cities and what our changing needs are, and getting away from just a commercial to residential perspective to really being flexible, to letting the market define what the needs are and not requiring discretionary review to pursue those that reuse.
Great, thank you. And we're excited about the expansion of adaptive reuse and how you've outlined it. Another question that came in relates to height districts or height limitations. And you covered that a little bit around the story core and the expansion, which we really appreciate that it's consistent now with the National Register boundaries. Someone's asked the question around height limitations around City Hall as well as the LA River within the community plan, and how will the community plan address this or place value on, you know, where there should be limitations or not?
Yeah, that's what, these are great questions. City Hall is a very focused issue, and I know that there's been some ongoing effort on the part of different facets of the city to do some master planning to potentially accommodate new infill development, really kind of southeast of the City Hall building itself. And while that effort itself may have been paused, there was a real opportunity to at least allow the downtown community plan to establish a better framework around City Hall. So within the CPIO, this implementing ordinance, there's actually a new little sub area that's been carved out around City Hall that establishes both an overall height limit and then also establishes what we're calling a view parabola, where essentially building height can't encroach into more or less a cone surrounding the City Hall building itself. Really trying to thread a needle that there's an opportunity to do some important infill there. There are some somewhat underutilized sites surrounding City Hall. There's a need for the city to be a little bit more efficient in how it utilizes office space and how it pays for office space, but wanting to make sure that any infill that does happen there is really sensible in its approach to honoring our existing architectural legacy. We're not really, frankly, looking for new landmark buildings next to City Hall so much as just honoring the landmark building that is there. With respect to height around the river, there are some height limits that have been proposed in the community adjacent to the river within the Arts District. And I will convey that will be probably an ongoing discussion as the plan moves on to its final moments of adoption at council, whenever that happens months from now. So that's not to overuse the term threading a needle. There's a real opportunity here to accommodate growth in terms of housing and employment, and the Arts District is a fantastic place to do that in a way that honors the existing design pattern. So we're wanting to focus on maintaining visibility of the river horizontally so that we're not to kind of throw any particular buildings under the bus here, but so that we're not having buildings completely wall off view of the river. In some cases, it is appropriate to also look at the vertical height, but I expect that will be a source of ongoing discussion throughout our process.
I imagine so. Another question that came in that's actually, it's a good question, and be very curious to what you say, was about this idea of moratorium, that, you know, that a lot of things are being outlined within the plan and what you're envisioning to occur through the plan. There are projects that are still moving forward because nothing's stopped. Is there any idea, or has there been any real discussion about placing a moratorium as you're inching, or hopefully progressing faster than inching, towards adoption of the plan, so that, you know, the type of the development that's getting in the queue will be reflective and really, you know, supporting the ideals and the vision that the plan is trying to achieve?
Yeah, you know, there's a real rigorous legal framework in which moratoriums can be created, and that's governed largely by state law. So that in and of itself could be a day-long discussion, but for all intents and purposes, the city really can't create a moratorium in areas where multifamily housing can be produced. So even if there was a political will to establish a moratorium, that really wouldn't withstand legal challenge, given the state's kind of larger needs to address housing production. So We continue on with our efforts to update the plan and to do our best to coordinate what that means for the numerous development projects that are proposed. To a large degree, those are pretty well coordinated, and a lot of projects are consistent with what the plan is envisioning in terms of affordable housing inclusion, in terms of general design. Though certainly there are outliers. Either as our proposed rules and regulations have come along after a development application has been submitted, or in cases where those applications have been initiated of their own accord.
Craig and Brittany and Vina, do you have a sense of, I mean, Brittany, you outlined kind of the timeline going forward. Do you have a sense of like how soon you think this would get to the point of being adoption?
Well, I can touch on the kind of what the major milestones are ahead. So we, as was mentioned earlier, we're hoping to hold our public hearing in early December, and that's an opportunity for us to really vet the plan in a formal way and collect feedback from all of the stakeholders, and then integrate that feedback into a staff report that we would bring to our City Planning Commission. So, with recommendations about what to change and what to not change in the community plan. So if we're holding our public hearing in December, our hope is that we would be able to be at the City Planning Commission early in the 2021 calendar year. After the City Planning Commission has had its consideration, and that could be one meeting, that could be multiple meetings, it's impossible to pinpoint what that would be. This would then move along to the City Council's Land Use Committee, and then to the full City Council. So in a universe where there's just accord about everything, everyone agrees, it would be a remarkable feat for this plan to have finished that process by mid-2021. And then following that adoption, there's actually a whole legal phase that happens where our attorneys comb through everything and make sure that the semicolons are in the right place and that we're not saying anything illegal. And then the plan actually goes into effect. So, and then there are some unique dynamics to point out. We have a new elected official for the downtown area coming on board fairly soon. And we're certainly doing our best to coordinate with that new office and those new staff. But that may have some implications on the timeline that are just impossible to foresee at this moment.
Okay, appreciate that. We're at that magic hour. We said we do this for an hour. We try to keep to that. I will say we still have other questions, so we'll work to answer those questions that have come in. I will say for Brittany, Vina, and Craig that some people have asked more questions about, I think, the mechanics of how the TFAR program will work, as well as wanting to know more about how the adaptive reuse, the new 2.0 adaptive reuse will apply. So there may be some interest in having further discussions about that, or walking people through those programs. I think would certainly be helpful, just for some additional feedback to you all. But again, thank you, Brittany and Vina and Craig, for taking part in this, and for all of those that have tuned in on Zoom and Facebook and eventually on YouTube. We really appreciate that, and this has been really helpful, and we'll continue the conversation as we all develop our comments and participate in the upcoming presentations and process.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Bye, everyone.